So, Assassin's Creed 3 is one of my favorite games ever. From the historical setting to the memorable moments, I've always held it in a high regard. Because of that, I've always struggled to see the flip side and why so many people hate it. I find most of the criticism extremely undeserved. Now, sure, the game isn't perfect, and I'll talk about the issues later, but I find a lot of people miss the point of what makes Assassin's Creed 3 so good. It's the minor details that change the way we interpret the story and the characters, which is why I'm going to go through each of the ways Assassin's Creed 3 is misunderstood so that we understand why I love the game so much. Assassin's Creed 3 is the story of a Native American assassin named Connor. Taking place during the American Revolution, the tone is a lot darker and more serious than the games before it. It balances both the struggle of the Native Americans and the American Revolution War. And because of that, the game deals with a lot more moral complexity. It's not a normal good versus evil story. Both the Assassins and Templars are shown as flawed organizations with questionable ideologies. I think this is why there are some misconceptions about the narrative and some of the choices that were made in the game creation. From an initial look, the game seems to be a straightforward revenge story, which to a certain extent it is. Connor sees the Templars destroy his village, he in turn wants revenge on the people who did it. Pretty simple, but over the story, the fight against the Templars becomes a lot more nuanced than just killing enemies. There's shifting loyalties, the brutality of war, and the meaning of freedom. So by digging past the surface level, Assassin's Creed 3 makes a more meaningful and deeper story. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect by any means. I know there are issues surrounding the main story. One of the most common complaints is the pacing. The game starts slow and then jumps around at an uneven pace, so it's hard to get fully engaged until the later part of the game. But there are some things to consider when talking about the pacing problems that I think put it into perspective. One is the first time playthrough versus a second or third time playthrough. When I initially played through the game, the first time I didn't see a huge problem with the pacing. It was a little slow, but playing as Haytham was extremely important for the themes of the story. Earlier, I said it's not a clear-cut good versus evil game. Playing as Haytham proved that from the beginning. Over the first few sequences, we are not told we're playing as a Templar. There are hints if you pay attention to detail, but all we see is someone with hidden blades doing what seems to be the same thing an assassin would do. Take out enemies, save people. So while he is ruthless in his ways, it doesn't seem that out of the ordinary of what we are used to. It shows us the parallels of the Assassins and Templars and how they have a similar goal, they just go about it in different ways. Now, I think they could have done it in a more streamlined way. We don't need 4 full sequences of Haytham gameplay to get the point across. By the time we get to adult Connor and the meat of the story, we miss the point of what the story is even about. If you're not paying attention to the small details, you'll blow right through the story assuming it's all about revenge. Like I said earlier, there's so much more to it than that. It's really a story of the complexity of war and how Connor navigates 2 different worlds. A common misconception is that Connor seeks the assassins for revenge. Wrong. In the dream, Connor is told to seek the assassins to protect his people. That's Connor's goal, and the Templars stand in the way of that goal. So at times, it does seem like the Templar-Assassin feud takes a backseat to the war, but both are important to the other. The Templars are influencing events in the revolution to steer the outcome towards chaos, which would benefit the Templars. Learning that Charles Lee was involved just adds more fuel to that fire. And that's where we need to understand Connor as an individual and how it plays into the plot. Now look, I'm not saying he's perfect, but Connor is not as boring as people make him out to be.
I hear Washington himself is going to be in attendance. Hope nothing bad happens to him.
You said there'd be a trial.
Oh, no trial for traitors, I'm afraid. Lee and Haytham sorted that. It's straight to the gallows for you.
I will not die today. The same cannot be said for you.
He had a really tough task following Ezio because Ezio was just so important to the franchise and gaming in general. I mean, you're talking about one of the most popular protagonists of all time, but Connor was not made to be a clone of Ezio. He's not the conventional assassin. Altair and Ezio both were raised within the Brotherhood. Connor is raised as a Mohawk warrior. Raised from the native background, he lacks that ingrained traditions of the Brotherhood. So I find trying to compare his more stoic personality to Ezio's playboy persona is a recipe for disaster. Hear me when I say this, I am not comparing Connor to Batman, but I find Connor shares more similarities with someone like Batman than he does with Ezio. They both lost parents at a young age, they both prioritize the mission over emotional attachment to protect themselves, both are self-reliant and trust only their own skills. When I look at it from that perspective, I find Connor's personality and the way he approaches situations to make a lot more sense. Especially when you keep in mind Connor was raised in the Mohawk culture, like I said earlier. He didn't spend a lot of time outside of the forest as a child. English is his second language, so as Connor spends time interacting with all these people outside of what he is really used to, he's a fish out of water. Look at how Connor speaks in his native language compared to how Connor speaks in English.
Propaganda. This feels wrong. Why not just speak to someone and explain my innocence?
You can't be serious.
We counter one lie with another. Words on paper instantly taken as truth, and all of it without question.
They loose this beast. Or have you forgotten? I merely helped you tame and turn it round.
There must be another way. Something more honest.
Well, when you find it, do let me know.
You can see in English how he's very blunt and direct, whereas his communication is a lot more comfortable when speaking to people from his village. It's because there is a bit of the language barrier for Connor. Even when he tries to be nice, he still may come off as blunt because of the cultural differences.
She is solid?
On top of that, Native Americans are known to be more quiet and reserved people. There is not the same level of small talk as there is in other cultures. Nowadays, people talk to avoid silence. That's not the case in their culture. So learning how to speak with the etiquette of the colonists is a learning curve for Connor. He's not used to being so polite and proper in conversation. When he has a question, he asks.
Shall we be off?
No.
What's the matter?
I have spent today drawn from one bit of madness to another with nothing to show for it. Before I go any further, I would like to know exactly what it is you intend.
He doesn't greet with the same amount of formality as the people he interacts with. He doesn't understand the social cues that you learn by being around certain ways of life for a while. Instead, we need to use Connor's body language to better understand what he feels rather than his words. Standing tall, arms crossed, flinching when people get close to him, those are better ways to understand how he is processing the situation around him. Crossed arms are often used in uncomfortable or stressed out situations. So rather than looking at the situation and assuming he wants to come off as this super strong tough guy, it could be seen as the opposite. He's an outsider, and that is his way of guarding himself until he better understands the environment. He keeps himself emotionally isolated in unfamiliar situations. Connor would rather spend his time observing and reacting rather than reacting right away for the first time he sees something. But it takes time to understand how Connor thinks and why he does what he does. Connor is a survivor. From a young age, he watched his mother die while he is unable to save her, and that's not something any 4-year-old should witness. He loses his innocence at such a young age that he doesn't get to live a peaceful childhood. So by the time we see him older, he's scarred from these experiences. Connor's emotions are bottled up to keep a focus on his mission. And so he comes off as one-dimensional and boring, someone that is only focused on the task at hand, even if it's not always logical. But Connor does have a deeper side to him that unfortunately is mostly found outside the main story. The homestead missions are extremely important to see how Connor reacts with a wider range of emotions.
Are you all right?
What do you think?
How did this happen?
Poachers in the woods. I asked them to leave. This was their answer.
Come on. We need to get that arm looked at.
What if the men who did this?
They can wait. Your wound cannot.
Connor shows compassion for the people and their personal struggles. He helps to improve their lives of the people around him. He has subtle moments of humor with the residents. It's not necessarily cracking jokes, but there are these moments of funny remarks when a situation allows. It's almost exactly the opposite of how Connor's portrayed in the main story. The homestead shows us a different level of complexity to his character. I would have liked more time to explore that emotional depth, especially through the main story, as I do think it would give people a better understanding of what Connor is truly like. Instead, people end up thinking he is boring or cold to most people. And it probably didn't help playing the first quarter of the game as his father Hatham, who is a lot smoother and more charismatic. Hatham is a very complex character, and his personality makes him a fan favorite.
Benjamin Church is holed up on an abandoned brewery on the waterfront. We should be done with this by sunrise.
Good. I would like to have those supplies returned as soon as possible.
Of course. I wouldn't want to keep you from your lost cause.
He's not the repetitive villain that's only purpose is to oppose our hero. Despite the evil he does, he really believes what he is doing is right. That's why playing with him is so important to push the story along. Seeing his perspective of why he genuinely believes what he is doing makes us understand the motives, even if they are harsh. Hatham believes that keeping people under control is the only way to peace in a chaotic world. And because of that, he isn't afraid of taking extreme measures to make sure he gets the job done. But what makes Hatham great is the conflict he has inside of himself during this journey. Despite believing in the Templar cause, he is still unable to part himself from his son. Some major moments were unfortunately not explained in the game. Within other forms of media, they go more in depth into the thoughts in these situations. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. But for instance, the Forsaken novel explains that during Connor's execution, Hatham is the one who saves him from being killed after the assassins fail to save him in time. It shows us how much guilt he has for some of the decisions in his life. Hatham lives with a double-edged sword of his dedication to his cause and his relationship with his son. It perfectly summarizes Hatham's character that he would be the one to sign the papers to hang his kid and then help him out, save him the next day. It also helps to shine the light on the assassins in a new way, especially Connor's mentor Achilles. Usually, assassins are seen to be wise and competent leaders, but failing to save one of their own symbolizes the fading glory of the assassin order. They are far from thriving, and that's what makes Achilles such an interesting character. He's a victim of the world around him. He is a tired old man waiting for death. Because of his past mistakes, he has a complexity with how he views the world. We see that with his relationship with Connor. You get the sense that Achilles is struggling with his own internal issues. The world has taken a toll on him, and because of that, he portrays the dark side of human nature, hopelessness. He's completely lost in his mission, but when Connor breaks through his skin, Achilles sees the potential for Connor to grow within the assassin ideals. A fresh start to set things straight for Achilles after years of giving up. It brings back the motivation to kill the Templars, but in that journey, Achilles shows his faults. While he does know the hardships of life, he also represents everything wrong with the colonial brotherhood. Connor even shows us that he really doesn't fully trust in the creed and the teachings he's learned from Achilles. That's because with Connor, he chooses to teach him about killing Templars, which is not what the creed actually is about. Connor has doubts about killing his father, and Achilles continually pushes for him to kill Hatham. But the creed is about protecting people and their freedom. If there is a way to achieve a peaceful ending, it should be done. But because of his past, he chooses secrecy and tough love in his relationship with Connor, which ends up making it hard for Connor to connect with him when you're asking someone to have blind faith in you. Now sure, a lot of the turmoil could have been avoided if Connor listened to Achilles, but I find it's the mentor's job to help guide the young student. So when the student is feeling lost or that they are not being guided, I put the blame primarily on the mentor. I don't think it's fair to put the burdens of the past on a student who wasn't around to know what went on. Overall, Achilles can be seen as a tragic hero who fought for the Brotherhood, or, depending on how he's interpreted, he can be seen as a cautionary tale against the assassins and their ways. That's the type of complexity of a mentor character helps show the dynamic of what makes this game so interesting. And look, Assassin's Creed 3 is not without its problems. I think it could have used some extra story explaining to help develop the characters a bit better. It sucks for casual players to need to read a novel or Reddit post online to find out about what happens in important moments of the game. On top of that, shorten the part with Hatham, give us more time with adult Connor. The idea of a morally gray assassin Templar conflict is so good, but it sometimes gets overshadowed by some of the other plot going on in the game. And I think that's why the game gets sometimes misunderstood, because the pacing moves so quickly, it's easy to miss some of the deeper plot points that we don't get to spend a lot of time on. When you do take the time to fully understand Assassin's Creed 3, it's easy to see how good this game is. I will forever stand by the fact that we need a Connor sequel. I think it would be better received than the first game. Give us a full game with Connor as an adult and see how fleshed out some of the arcs and plots could be. With that being said, I would love to see your guys' opinions down below, and I'll see you guys next time.